Welcome to this week's Airline with Degree, everyone. Thanks for coming along. I threatened last week that Martin Teasdale's episode would be the last of the year. It's a blatant lie. This week, I'm going to welcome onto the show very shortly the co-founder of Intersect HP, whose other co-founder, George Todd, we had on quite some weeks back. George's episode still stands as one of the most watched episodes of the entire series, so it should be interesting to see where everyone's at. And I hope that the people watching today, everybody's in Christmas mode, so I'd love to see some of you guys having some very interactive comments and questions for myself and Darren as we go through the episode today. That's what we're here for, guys. It's a live show for a reason. I try not to pre-record because we love to try and get some questions in from the audience as we go. But without any further ado, welcome to the show, Darren. Good to have you along.
Hi, Paul. Thanks very much. Good to be on.
Awesome. Yeah. And you guys are in the middle of load shedding, right?
We have some load shedding. We're pretty used to it, so no major dramas.
Yeah. The show must go on. You guys shut down for holiday season in South Africa, right? It's less about Christmas, more about getting to the beach with a six-pack, right?
Yeah, I think it depends which sector you're in. I think in the customer experience space, probably not so much, Paul, but in some sectors, yeah. They're at the beach already.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I sympathise, because if a sales message comes in on Christmas Day, then I'll probably give it a miss. But if it comes in on Boxing Day, I might answer it. So yeah, like this.
If it comes in early enough Christmas morning, it'll be fine.
Do you know what? I tend to find I do my best sales conversations when I've had a couple of rums. Always loosens up the conversational tones. We can have some really good, candid conversations with people. It's good. Awesome. No, good to have you along, Darren. How are things going at Intersect? Because I think the last I spoke to George, you guys were just kind of launching. How's that launch gone?
Yeah, it's going well, Paul. Thanks. It's as ever. It's super busy, and it's trying to make sure that you're spending your time on the right things. But we're growing. I don't think anyone ever grows as fast as they would like, but we are trying to do it in a sustainable way. Keep the eye on the quality and make sure we're delivering what our clients and customers want. But we're growing. It's busy, good busy rather than the negative busy. So far so good, and looking forward to next year and lots of exciting stuff coming up then. So
fantastic. Good to hear. You guys are excellent friends. And I've really enjoyed seeing the story of your progression as you guys have gone along. And before we get too deep into things, Darren, I tend to ask a standard question to all of my guests. How did you end up in contact centres in the first place? And how did you end up meeting George? Where did that come from?
Well, look, if you asked George that question on his interview, which I think you did, then you could literally play that 90-second clip back, because my story is very, very similar. So I didn't finish my university degree, ran out of financial support during that, halfway through year two. And at the time, as a youngster, without that qualification, the option that was open was contact centres. So I started as an agent, and I say without any overstatement at all, that those couple of years have probably been the most important years of my career in terms of understanding all aspects of contact centres and recognizing the impact it has. So started on the phone selling car insurance, and then did the normal progression through the contact centre ranks. There's lots and lots of talk about how the call centre space really enables careers and creates careers unlike any other sector. Certainly for me, I've been very lucky to be able to progress through the ranks, so to speak. That journey took me through BPO, into captives, and then ultimately into a consulting space where I was an independent consultant for a period, and was reintroduced to merchants, with merchants as a client. And a 3-month gig in South Africa led to a permanent move to South Africa, and that's where I was introduced to George. So we've known each other for, I guess, 12 years, worked very closely with each other for 6 or 7 years.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's great. It's great to hear. And you guys kind of then left merchants around about the same time and decided to set up Intersect between you guys both. And what was the what was the overarching strategy from your side of things in setting up Intersect? What did you kind of want to solve in terms of problems that you saw in the industry as you set up Intersect?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question. That's a 3-hour conversation over a bottle of wine, but or two. But there were a number of things that came together at the same time, and I guess there was as we left our previous employee, you go through a natural period of reflection. What did we achieve in that time? What didn't we achieve that we wanted to achieve? What were the reasons we didn't achieve those things? You try and avoid the self-flagellation. And be objective, and then you pull out some nuggets from it. And a lot of the things that we really wanted and passionately believed in was the power of people, and that was always a big driver for us. And then, of course, at that time we had we're coming out of the whole pandemic period, or at least coming out of those initial challenges that we all faced in this industry. And we recognized that the whole work from home model was a challenge, and it wasn't a technology challenge. It was a cultural challenge. It was an operating model challenge. It was a management practices challenge. And we realized that while the industry had done, in my view, remarkably well to keep the lights on and keep servicing customers for a really difficult period, the reality was that we had kind of created two operating models. We had maintained our bricks and mortar operating model, and then we tried to create a work from home model. So when we put those two things together, we wanted to design what we described as a post-pandemic operating model, a single operating model with the underlying operating practices, processes, structures, technology infrastructure, culture, et cetera, that single model that could apply in a bricks and mortar environment, a hybrid environment, or a work from home environment. And we described that not uniquely, but we described that as a work from anywhere model. So that was the real driver.
That's interesting, and it's refreshing to hear somebody kind of stop segregating out the whole on-site work from home hybrid working. I'm sick of having to put those forward slashes into every post that I write to kind of make sure everybody's on board with what I'm talking about. And you've described it very succinctly there in terms of it's no longer a decision as to which operating model you work with. It should just be this is how this particular person or team works, and this is how we're going to respond to that situation and treat them like any other team. And that's a really cool strategy to have in order to, like, I know one of the big things that you guys are big on is attracting the right talent and then retaining it, right?
It's critical. It's in the BPO space, your biggest avoidable cost is attrition, right? It's so if you can retain people, then not only do you reduce your cost, but you also enhance and improve the level of service that the end customer is getting, and therefore your clients are happier, and it becomes a virtuous circle. And so, yeah, that's a critical component for us.
Fantastic. And I think, it's rare. Like, I've probably only spoken to maybe half a dozen outsourcers and BPOs globally that have been able to tell me how they're different in their space, like in a way that was easy to understand, in a way that didn't take them ages to get there. And you guys are definitely one of those sort of differentiated players in that space that I see. It's very clear to me why a client would choose you guys over some of the competition out there. And I think, to be fair, it's a very hard to attract that differentiation in that space, because kind of everybody talks about a lot of the similar things and a lot of the proofs in the pudding, right? So that's got to have been tough to start out again from scratch, despite your background for you and George, to start out from scratch with nothing to really speak to achievements with a brand new business. That sounds like it's been a tough journey.
It's certainly not an easy journey, and if it was, then everybody would do it, right? I mean, we very quickly realized that if we were going to do our own thing, then we had one of two options. We either took the "we can do it better" model, and if you replace better with more efficient, then that's the standard approach. Normally, when people move out of whatever industry it is and do their own thing, then they're looking to drive efficiencies because they've lived in a world where they understand all the waste in the system and they have a view on how they can remove that waste. Our view was that was kind of, the risk was that you were joining a race to zero type market. And so the other option was to do it different. And within different was better. But that better in that context wasn't just more efficiently. It was more than that. So it was tough to start from scratch, but there are also major advantages because you have no legacy. You don't have any legacy technology infrastructure that you need to replace or integrate with. You don't have any legacy culture. You don't have any legacy operating practices, et cetera, et cetera. So you can create from scratch, which is a challenge, but it's a very different challenge from trying to turn something around and keep the lights on at the same time. One of our old bosses used to call it climbing two mountains at the same time. That's difficult.
It is, but it's good to see that the hard work's finally paying off for you guys.
Thank you.
Like, I think back to the very first conversation I had with George. It was refreshing just how genuine and honest and transparent he was, compared with some of the conversations I was having with other people. So it was refreshing just to have somebody be really, really candid, with no reason. Like, there was no relationship between us at that point. There was no reason for him to be as trusting and as forthcoming as he was. And I think that speaks volumes to you guys both. In terms of roles between yourself and George, I'd imagine you've both been there and done merchants, which is a huge business to have been part of. What's your kind of niche role alongside George at Intersect? What separates you both?
Well, the thing that separates us most is what needs to be done at the time and who's best placed to do it. So we have a number of overlapping, I guess, areas of expertise, and where there are specialisms, we divide and conquer in that way. So, people who know me will know that I'm a big fan of Excel and all things numbers. So, I'll naturally lean in that direction. George is super strategic and super visionary. So, where that's required, then we lean in that direction. But in the main, our roles are co-founders. So we haven't subdivided between CEO and COO. We work together on pretty much everything that's critical. And then we divide and conquer at the right time. But we've both come through, various parts of the contact center and BPO space. So we've been through the strategic side, the operation side, even the support functions, workforce management, all of those things. So we've all kind of traveled around a bit. So we pool our capabilities. Let's put it that way.
Awesome. And it's really nice to see that you've both come through the ranks as well. And I think that's something that stands out for me in contact center world as much as it did in retail. There was very few people in retail who kind of came in at a very senior level from another business and walked straight into that role and did well. And it was very few businesses that took those sorts of people directly in from other businesses with that intention of putting them in those leadership roles. And I think contact center is very, very similar in terms of everybody who gets to the top does it through blood, sweat and tears, having done all the jobs at what I call the coal face at the front end, right the way through. There've been a few comments that I've seen recently, and I just keen to get your thoughts on it, Darren, was in terms of contact centers being a challenging career because not everybody can become leadership. And I have a very different view on that, but I'm keen to hear what your thoughts are in terms of, does it count as a career if you stay on the front line talking to customers for 15 years?
Yeah, jeez. Definition of career. So my instinctive answer is absolutely yes, it can be. Everybody has a, if you want to classify, I always like the analogy of juggling. What are you juggling at this moment? How many balls are you juggling? Which of those balls are rubber and which of those balls are glass? So which ones can you afford to drop and which ones you can't? And we hold things in different balance in terms of our family lives, our work lives. Some people are carers, and therefore a big chunk of their time is afforded to different things. I absolutely believe a career can be frontline work throughout your career, and I can't see any reason why that's not the case. The job of leadership, in my view, is around preparing the ground for things to grow. I've started using an expression. It's not about trying to pull the plant out of the ground. That's not what good gardeners do. What good gardeners do is they prepare the soil. They make sure that the weeds don't stifle growth, etc., etc., etc. And if that plant has a natural growth curve that gets to a certain size, as many plants do, then that's the plant being natural and reaching its maximum potential, and that's absolutely legitimate and fine. Where that plant wants to grow further and spread, then I think contact centers are unlike. Most of my life has been in contact centers, so I can't claim to have experience in all sectors, but pretty much unlike any other sector I've seen. The ability to not just grow vertically, but grow horizontally, and then vertically, and then horizontally as your career takes you, I think is unrivaled for that.
Yeah, I think. Do you know what? I think you've articulated that really well, because in my mind, the initial response that I was going to suggest was that a career is whatever you're satisfied with, and if you're satisfied with working on the front line, like I know police officers. I once wanted to be in the police force, right? And I know police officers who've spent 25 years walking the beat, and they're absolutely satisfied with walking the beat, and that's what their passion is, and they don't want a desk job where they get removed away from doing what their passion is. So that's absolutely cool. And to a certain extent, every business needs those people who want to do that job, and they don't want to progress on to, leadership's not for everyone. And I'm sick of all these LinkedIn posts that kind of assume that everybody wants to be a leader. If I'm honest, I did leadership for 15 years, and actually having handed back the reins at the end of my retail career and now being kind of my own boss for a little while, working at MOJO-CX, like I'm quite comfortable with not having anybody's results, like my world revolving around anybody else's results. It's a refreshing change. Like, I'm kind of pleased I took that step back, because it's given me a breather. Which kind of leads into the other thing that you alluded to there, is like it's not a, just because somebody doesn't want to progress right now doesn't mean they won't want to progress when things change at home and their lifestyle changes and the family grow up and things like that. And I think probably the danger a lot of people get into is they end up being pigeonholed by their leadership team as being a certain type of person. Then those desires change and nobody notices, because nobody's then asking those questions consistently. Is that something that you guys have seen, like in your career, in terms of, do you see that happening quite often? Like, do people get kind of left behind, and is that what drives a lot of the churn in the business, do you think?
I definitely think there's an element of that, Paul. I think, especially in the BPO side of CX, it's pretty high pressure, it's pretty high velocity, and you need to move very quickly. So by default, I think there's a tendency, or can be a tendency, to try and manage by exception. So where are my amber lights? And I'll go and fix my amber lights. So I think we all need to be cognizant of the fact that we've got huge talent in our frontline teams, and we need to work harder at identifying that and proactively identifying that in advance of a need, so that we can support those agents' growth. And so I definitely think there's an element of that. We're very, very focused on outcomes and focused on performance, and we're driving performance cultures and all of those great words. But whenever we talk about those buzzwords, we need to recognize there is a flip side. And the flip side is sometimes you can leave some of the other components behind. And please, be absolutely assured, I am not suggesting in any way that that's easy, because it's not. And a big chunk of our focus and what we're trying to do, and everything that's building towards our vision and our future, is around trying to make sure we've got intersections into what I describe as the vicious circle and turning it into a virtuous circle. So how do we stop, when lots of organizations in this sector have churn rates of 50 or 60 or 70 or 80% attrition, then that's a huge cost. It's a huge draw on management overhead. It's a huge draw on support functions. And so loads of energy is going into just keeping that hamster wheel going. Yeah. And what we want to try and do is put a stick into the spokes of that hamster wheel, so that we can divert some of that management overhead, that resource, that focus on the more future-looking things, rather than keeping it ticking.
Yeah, I think that's fair. If I think back to my my days in retail, I think what a lot of people did was exactly what you've just described, and kind of they'd acknowledge that the platform they were on was on fire, and they spent their entire time trying to manage the flames instead of putting out the actual source of the fire in the first place. Putting out the source of the fire is massively painful, and it's a really hard thing to do, and it's a hard thing to do well, and it causes you a lot of problems whilst you're trying to put it out. And it
Yeah, it's a
takes
great. It's a great analogy. It's a great analogy, and I think anyone in a leadership position, their battle and their challenge and their, what they're certainly taught from myself. What I am trying to do is spend my time in the fire prevention. I'm not trying to spend my time putting out the root cause of the fire or putting out the fire. I'm trying to prevent the thing getting hot in the first place, right? That's but what you can't do is you can't ignore the flames to go and do fire prevention.
No, and I think until you've got a certain level of confidence and experience, it's really hard to figure out where the flame fighting starts and where the flame prevention starts. And it's kind of, you've got to be brave enough to step away from the fire to start thinking about how you're going to stop the rest of your field burning. You've got to learn that almost by trial and error. And I think that for me is the key to a lot of business success is acknowledging where your leaders and your frontline leaders are at and supporting them properly. It's one of the things I love about MOJO-CX and where we take our coaching platform specifically is kind of focused on that, enabling team leaders to understand their performance and transform the conversations away from how many coaching sessions have you had, and looking at the quality that they're outputting. So not to gauge them against their targets, and yeah, that's going to happen, but to understand how you can support them going forwards. And I think that's the bit that everybody, regardless of the industry, forgets about, is those first line leaders are the most fragile leaders you've got. They're the most under fire and they're the most under pressure. And yet we do traditionally very little to support them. It's more or less sink or swim, right?
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And the other thing that often gets forgotten is those frontline leaders in a contact center environment, no matter how senior they become in their careers, they are unlikely to ever have as large a span of control of direct reports as they do when they're a team leader. So it's their first leadership role, and they have the largest span of control that they'll have in their careers. That's a staggering thing to consider. But what you guys are doing at MOJO-CX, and where I think that a lot of the power is it means that the leadership from frontline through senior are able to focus on inputs. And if you focus on inputs and change inputs, then the outputs look after themselves. And the analogy I often use is telling a scrum half to be a better scrum half, isn't coaching. It isn't helping them in any way. It's just confusing them. And you focus on the inputs, and then they will become a better scrum half. Apologies to all of you guys who don't like rugby, but whatever the case may be. But asking an agent to be better to deliver better AHT, it doesn't really help. It just doesn't help. And if you're focusing on an agent's questioning techniques, conversational skills, rapport building capability, how to get to the number of a problem quickly but efficiently, those are inputs that the agent can then do something with, and that will drive an output.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's important to be able to get to the source of those inputs for the coaching session.
Absolutely.
And I don't I've been a leader in a few different environments, but never in a contact center environment. I once started training to be a team leader, and my missus took exception. She wasn't my missus then, but she still took exception. So that's why we got married, because we realised that exception was where we wanted to go with things. But yeah, I think, where was I going to go with that? I think for me, having that control over the inputs so that you can fully understand, like if I wanted to monitor how my team were doing in a retail environment, I can go and watch them. And to a certain extent, you can do that in a contact center environment, but you don't see every iteration. Like retail's a lot more repeatable. You're putting stock out on shelves, you're serving on a till, you're dealing with conversations that are going on. That's fairly repeatable. And if I could see that happen over a few things, I'll get the gist of how that person operates. Contact center is very different because it very much depends on the customer you've got on the phone or on the live chat or whatever. And for me, unless you can break down and review specific contact types and certain indicators on those pots of indicators in calls, I don't understand how you can effectively coach someone. And I think that's a big part of where the problem has been, is that technology has been too expensive. And it just meant that the insights that are available for team leaders, coaches, QAs, whoever, to talk to the agents, it's setting themselves up for failure because they're opening themselves up for a rebuttal. Because all the agent has to do is go, well, that's fair, but I don't respond like that all the time. And where are you going to go with that? There's nowhere to go with it. Like, unless you've happened to have listened to 2 or 3 calls where you've caught them doing that thing, like, you've got no comeback on that. And so there's no real pressure on the agent to change their performance. Whereas if you can say, well, look, I've listened to 10 complaints this week, and you do this one thing that's really annoying your customers, probably don't even realize you're doing it. Right, okay. And now can we put that into our training pack so that our new agents don't have to go through this conversation? You know, like, and obviously I'm biased, but like, for me, I think that is something that just needs to change in the industry, because like that's the way forward.
No, I think there's huge value in leadership listening to live calls and seeing the entire experience, but it's part of an overall solution. And I think for decades we've relied on these samples, and anybody with any background in statistics or probabilities or anything of that sort will tell you that most of those sample sizes mean that your outcome is statistically unviable.
Yeah.
It's certainly, indisputably at an agent level, it's not statistically viable. So the ability to be able to provide that analysis across a much broader range of contacts and be able to do the analytics behind that, I think what you guys are doing, just absolutely helps with that and helps to direct where the energy needs to be. Numbers are fantastic, but numbers they very rarely tell you the whole story. They tell you where you need to go and dig and scratch and understand in more detail. And I certainly think that's part of what you guys are really able to offer.
Awesome. So, like, I guess we've touched on your history. We've touched on a little bit of where Intersect have been. Where do you see opportunities going for the coming year? I know it's kind of hard. Like, it's been a tough year. You've got the cost of living crisis going on globally. Let's be honest. It's not just here in the UK that the people think that's the thing that's happening in the UK. It's not. It's global. Is that pushing a lot of opportunities out to South Africa, do you think? Like, because South Africa has already been a choice of destination for BPO world anyway. Do you think that's accelerating now?
Yeah, look, it's certainly accelerating. It's accelerating in terms of those clients that want to provide services to their customers from South Africa. And of course, that means that it's also attracting the attention of some of the tier 1 BPO players that haven't had a presence in South Africa up to this point. So yeah, there's a big spotlight on South Africa, and my hope and my belief is that South Africa will make its name for itself, if it hasn't already, and I think it has, but more globally, as not just another lower cost destination. It's not just another opportunity to drive labor arbitrage. It is an opportunity to get onshore performance for offshore prices. That sounded a bit cliche, didn't it? But yeah, I think if we can create a name for ourselves in that way, then that will be hugely beneficial to South Africa. And we all know that we have a huge labour pool of amazing talent, and unlike many of the traditional offshore destinations, that pool of labour talent speak English as their might not be their first language, but it's their natural language outside of the home, even if it's not inside of the home. So whereas in lots of those traditional places, the only time I speak English is when I'm in the contact center, that's not the case in South Africa. Because we have 11 official languages, lots of people communicate in English day to day, across what they do. So we've got this huge labour pool of fantastic talent, with a culture of wanting to help and wanting to do things for a purpose, which is hugely important. And unfortunately, alongside that, we've got a youth unemployment rate of 50%. So, pulling all of those things together, we've got a huge opportunity to provide fantastic onshore performance And as I say, you do get the benefits of labour arbitrage with that, but that shouldn't be the sole reason for looking at South Africa. From an Intersect perspective, we absolutely want to be, part of that and driving that and supporting that, and really focusing on those relationships where customer experience is perceived as critical, and it's not just a cost play. It's about customer experience and how customer experience impacts the top line performance of a business. It impacts the bottom line performance of the business, and therefore that's a critical component of the strategy, and that's where we want to play.
Fantastic. What a great end to the show, and closing out the year for us here on AI, I would agree, Darren. So you're the last guest of the year, contrary to what I said to Martin Teasdale last week. I was just buttering him up. Yeah, it's been fantastic to have you on the show, Darren. I've been quite keen on getting you on ever since I had George on the show as well, but I didn't want to kind of destroy people with too much Intersect all at once. We kind of spread it out a little bit. It took a while to get you back on the show. Yeah, it's been great to have you on the show. Some very interesting viewpoints there, and thank you very much for agreeing to share some of those thoughts with us. Everybody who's watching along at home, I'm going to ask Darren the question that you've probably seen hovering along the bottom of the ticker now and again. Darren, what do you call a deer with no eyes?
I have no idea, mate.
Exactly. And with that Christmas cracker bombshell, I'm going to see you all in the new year. Thanks very much for coming along, everyone. Take care. Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul. Good to speak.
You too. Bye-bye.